Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.
Hello, and welcome to Champions of Psychology, a show with the goal of openly talking about mental health and gaming, presented by Codename Entertainment and TakeThis.org. Every Tuesday at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time here on twitch.tv/CNE Games, or later on your favorite podcast service, Mitra Jordan and Raffael Boccamazzo, aka Dr. B, talk about mental health in these unprecedented times, as well as how gaming affects us. If you're here with us live in the chat, you can leave a question. I, Treavor Bettis, will ask them later in the show. Our topic today is going to be rejection sensitivity, which is going to be so much fun. Also, I wonder, I know I've said this before, but like I wonder how long I need to keep unprecedented times, because we're now a year into the show. So like it's kind of getting precedented.
I think a precedent has been set.
I think a precedent has been set. I might need to change up that dialogue. But before we get to all of that, who are you for the fine folks who may not know?
Well, I'm Mitra Jordan. No long name reasons here. Sorry, I couldn't resist. We're in season
so
5.
good.
If you know, you know. Anyway, I'm Mitra Jordan. I'm a therapist working in Victoria, BC. I work with all kinds of people, often couples and families. I often end up finding myself discussing games and gaming, and sometimes the moral panic around video games and such. And of course, I enjoy games myself. And so this is an area very close to my heart. Although rejection sensitivity itself is close to my heart, we'll see where we get to today. I managed to take up a lot of time there. So.
And who is that with the glorious mane?
The glorious mane that I've been keeping tied back for a while. Actually, no, it's weird. I feel like over the course of the show, we can go back to episode 1 and look at the evolution of the Medusa-like hair that is on my head.
See, I'm still sad because when we did the test video before we started, you had a glorious beard going on. I'm like, all right, we got two big
Give me
beards
a week,
going.
I can grow it out.
We got similar lengths now, but I'm still missing the bushy beard.
But hi everybody, I'm Raffael Boccamazzo, better known as Dr. B for long Italian name reasons, not long Italian hair as we seem to be going with right now. But I am a clinical psychologist in Washington State. I am also the clinical director of what was the first mental health nonprofit to serve the game industry at the time of our formation in 2012, TakeThis.org.
Yeah.
Make sure to go check out all the free resources we have, articles, et cetera, et cetera. I'm also an expert on the applied use of tabletop RPGs, and I am happy to be here for season 5. I'm busting out the tiara just for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
Yes.
tiara.
Works well with the hair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The tiara's made its earliest season appearance.
Ever.
I'm just we're making it happen. We're pulling it from the tiara pocket dimension early.
Please insert that into your tabletop RPG worlds as necessary.
I am the prettiest princess.
Definitely. I will not challenge your crown, even though I do have a laurel wreath that
you will rival his crown.
Oh, you're a winner. I'm the princess.
Oh boy.
And
Aren't the princesses the winners?
And I somehow am supposed to keep things on track. Speaking of which,
Sorry.
Oh yeah, mental health show.
It's a mental health show, and yeah, we're going to talk about rejection sensitivity, which is just so much darn fun, and everyone loves it. And there's absolutely nothing to be worried about with it at all. For people who don't know what rejection sensitivity is, what is rejection sensitivity? Yeah, no, that is true. But actually, no, that may not be true. It may be you're about to have a realization.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, in a nutshell, rejection sensitivity is where we react more profoundly than expected to any perceptions of rejection, whether it's real rejection or or imagined rejection. Either way, we're just the name says it all. We're really sensitive to perceived or real rejection.
Imagine
Yeah.
Rejections is my emo cover band of Imagine Dragons.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
Nice reframe after you didn't get that record contract.
Oh, guys, you are on the wit today.
Sorry, what were you going to say about rejection sensitivity?
But yeah, that's really it. The name says it all. That a lot of us, with varying diagnoses. We're going to get into this because especially in the last couple of years, something called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which we don't use that term on this show for a reason, and we'll get into that. That's been making rounds on like ADHD and autism TikTok and Twitter. But rejection sensitivity is something that a lot of different diagnoses experience. For those of us who are autistic, for those of us with ADHD-like symptoms, part of it has to do with we don't regulate our emotions the same way or as well necessarily as other folks. With a diagnosis like borderline personality disorder, there's symptoms of anxious preoccupation with real or imagined abandonment, and again, emotional dysregulation. With social phobia, it's literally symptomatic of having anxiety or fear about perceived criticism or rejection in social situations. With depression, we often look for negative attributions about what people think about it. It's not limited to ADHD or autism.
Absolutely. In fact, it occurs among marginalized folks as well, right? Where if you've experienced rejection or not the same level of service that other people get, you're going to start becoming vigilant about that. You're going to also start to try and figure out strategies to overcome it. And that's no different in this case. So we can talk about it as kind of a vigilance to rejection as well. Looking out for it, having an expectation of it. And that's based on actually experiencing it.
Absolutely.
And that's the difference, right? Between something that's just, I'm making it up, it's in my head, versus something that actually I've had a lot of life experience with. And therefore, of course, I'm going to be sensitive to the possibility of it.
And this is not to say that anybody likes rejection, but what we're talking about in this case is being sensitized to it for often very logical reasons. I think there's some research that exists about kids with ADHD, and I'm not going to get the numbers exactly correct, but I'm going to give you an idea of what the research says, that kids with ADHD in school alone are corrected on average something like 12 more times each day, which over the course of the research period that they did, estimated to 5,000 more corrections about their behavior than their non-ADHD counterparts in school alone. And over years, that builds up. And I will say that from personal experience.
I can vividly remember them.
Yeah, absolutely. Not to mention the correction itself, but then the social response of those around you to that correction, right? The other kids in the class, for example, what you then experience at recess. So the correction, everything that goes along with it sort of multiplies or has an additive aspect to the experience, a negative effect. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, not to mention the internalized self-loathing that can occur with all of that stuff. That, and I know I talked about this earlier on in the Autism AMA episode way back in season 2. Way back.
Wow.
So that over time, when this happens enough, and this really does happen, that a lot of us with ADHD, with autism, are literally told repeatedly over and over and over and over and over again that we're getting it wrong. We're getting it wrong. You're doing it wrong. And we can come to expect that we go into situations, and I certainly do. I'm constantly anxious. about getting it wrong? And is this going to be that time that I hear about it 3 months later, that I got it wrong enough that it lingered as a resentment towards somebody? And is it my fault? Of course, it's always my fault, because I'm the one who gets it wrong all the time. And those are the messages that get built up over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, after a while, it means you stop trying, and maybe you stop taking risks. And, you know, we had an episode about play quite a while ago, but we talked about how if you want to experiment or be playful or learn something, you have to be feeling safe, right? You have to be feeling like you're somewhere you can make mistakes. And now, if you look at the experience of someone who gets a lot of correction at school, gets made fun of, how safe do you think they can be feeling? And how effectively do you think they can be learning?
Well, especially, right? And I know we've used this metaphor before, but if we think of our brain like a computer, and now 25% of our active resources are being taken up by scanning the environment for perceived danger or perceived rejection or anything like that. Yeah, how effective are we going to be in any other situation when we've got so many of those resources allocated at any one time?
Yeah. And, you know, I can personally attest to the fact that I used to totally tune out in school. And we had these desks. And we had these desks where you kind of lifted up the front of the desk, right? And half the class, I'd have the front of the desk up like this, and I'd be reading comics or something, you know, and I would just tune out completely, or I'd be off, you know, somewhere else. I would just not be present. It seemed safer. I'm not saying it was great. Obviously, I wasn't learning anything, but it certainly seemed a lot safer than taking the risk of trying and failing, or being told I wasn't good enough, or that, you know, I couldn't, you know, obviously I wasn't getting it right, or I should try harder. This was one that came up frequently in reports, you know, and does not apply herself, needs to try harder, that kind of thing. So
yeah.
I
the excuse of, no, I'm reading my Pokemon cards, I'm not just looking at them, only went so far in 5th grade.
So I think I'll speak for myself here. I retreated into things that I felt empowering, because I felt so disempowered when it came to my school experience, when it, especially being undiagnosed on the spectrum. I mean, nobody knew what to do with it. I retreated into things that made me feel empowered, and for me, that was video games. I was good at video games. I was real good at video games. And that alone, I don't know, it became for me, it became this sort of cycle of not wanting to take chances socially, because I became to anticipate I would be screwing up.
Yeah. Someone just put one in the chat. Who is this? Kieranson, also hearing that quote, "You have so much potential." Oh man, did I hate that one.
I hated that so much. Yeah.
Okay, let's rolling up the sleeves. Fight now.
Yeah, no, the retreating into things that make you feel comfortable or powerful. I mean, like, legitimately, the way that I got into writing was because I was assigned something and I was like, I don't understand how to do this. I don't want to do this. And then realizing that I could bypass that and just write a short story. Essentially what the one was is in 7th grade, it was, you were doing, you know, the spelling tests and stuff. And they're like, oh, you have to use all the spelling words in a story. And I didn't know what to do. So I just started writing fantasy and just finding weird ways to plug those words in. And I ended up really loving it and discovering that I enjoyed doing that. I got told I was wrong about it, though. Because, of course, I finally wrote something that was more than 3 paragraphs long, and they went, you don't write that much.
Oh, well, you really can't win in some situations,
No,
can you?
no.
It's so awful.
I finally got into
Yeah.
reading after them telling me that you have a second
Ah.
grade reading level for like, 7 years. And then they told me you're reading too much.
Yeah.
Which then again just kicked up the rejection sensitivity and just made me go, okay,
You're doing
cool.
it wrong.
Yeah, I'm doing it wrong no matter
You're
what
doing
way
it
I
wrong.
do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Go play sports with the other kids. Oh, wait, you're doing that wrong too.
oh God. don't get me
Last
started
to
on
be
sports.
picked every time. Don't
Yep.
even get
What's
me
up?
started.
Hey,
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
can we all be like the last picked club?
Heck yeah.
Definitely.
Last
I'm
Yes.
right
pick
there.
club. That's what we
Yes.
are.
Yeah.
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 Collectively, the last picked club. All
I
right.
love it. I love it. It's kind of like, actually, I do remember thinking that I was part of the out group, and we were so out, we were great. And we were so out, we were in. And I really didn't give a, two hoots about what's her name was doing. There was a what's her name, and she was generally super condescending. There's always a bit of a queen bee, particularly among girls in high school.
I
Oh,
thought
yeah.
that was cheerleader and not what's her name.
No, I'm calling it what's her name. We didn't have
Okay.
cheerleaders
Oh, we
in
had
high school,
multiple,
so oh yeah. No, we're
But what
going
about
with
so and so?
yeah, them too. Them too. Or there was this kid who always interrupted in history class, and the teacher never told him off. But I put up my hand, and so when we talk about rejection sensitivity, we can talk about that too. Which is the different way in which figures of authority, usually teachers, educators, respond to you, I'm pointing at me, versus him or her, right? Because it felt like when other people had a point to make or when they took a risk, it worked out. But when I did, it didn't.
Yep.
And so that really underscores again that why should I try? None of you all get me. Why should I make an effort? Yeah.
I remember even saying that to some people
Oh,
on
yeah.
multiple occasions.
Fun fact, that's how I figured out my grandfather had ADHD. As I thought of it, I was just like, oh man, he totally had rejection sensitivity. Oh my gosh.
I remember actually saying to people, okay, so no, let's break this down for me here, okay? One of those people may have been my ex-wife. We won't get into it. But
May or may not,
Listen.
no names here.
okay, I'm gonna get yelled at one way or the other here. I'm gonna be told I'm doing it wrong one way or the other. In situation one, I put in a lot of effort and I still get it wrong.
Yep.
In situation two, I kick back and play video games and still get it wrong.
Yep.
But I put in less effort.
Oh yeah. That was my senior year experience. The
Right?
latter was my senior year experience.
Yeah.
I do want to bring up real quick because there might be some people who are watching this that aren't familiar with things that we're talking about, and you're like, you just sound like you're overly sensitive, and like that
we are overly sensitive.
and
that's what we're saying.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to get into is the emotional dysregulation of it. Because I almost brought that up, and I realized in our notes we've got that coming up in a bit. I just wanted to say we are going to cover that, so it's not just going to be us being like stupid teachers that we hated in high school.
It feels pretty good. But
It does feel
true.
pretty good.
We do have more to say than this.
No, we can gripe. We can definitely gripe. Well, because this is something we've all three of us have experienced.
Yeah.
Yep.
You two have ADHD. I'm autistic. This is something we've all experienced.
Our powers combined.
We are weird.
Sure. I'll go with that. I quite like it. I mean, says the man wearing a tiara. I mean, yes.
Yes. Can I help you?
What? So I
It
think
suits you. That's all I have to say, sir. Sir, it looks fantastic.
I think now is a good time to talk to move on to the next thing we want to talk about, which was the term rejection sensitivity dysphoria.
Boo!
All right, take it away, tiara man.
Now I do want to preface this with, if you have been saying rejection sensitivity dysphoria, don't beat yourself up about it, because there is some irony in the fact that there is a term for a thing that means that you get sensitive about rejection, and then there's a wrong thing for it. The irony is thick in it, but don't worry, it's fine.
Okay, so part of the reason I think I've been personally hesitant to talk about this publicly is because this is such a validating term that to so many of our experiences, because those of us who have executive functioning challenges, we literally cannot regulate our emotions the same way as other people. So rejection sensitivity dysphoria is a term created by a psychiatrist named William Dodson, who's an ADHD researcher. The problem with this term is there's no research on this term. Okay.
That's a big problem.
There are no peer-reviewed studies on this term, and some of his original claims that this is something that's experienced, in a way unique to those with ADHD doesn't hold up to the other research on rejection sensitivity as something that's experienced by a variety of diagnoses.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do not use the term rejection sensitivity dysphoria because, one, it's not unique to ADHD or autism. Two, it's not a separate diagnosis, nor is it, we don't, at least there's just no research on it. And even he wrote 2 articles for Attitude, ADD magazine, and even the WebMD article on rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which also lists medications used to treat rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which there's no research on those medications either, by the way. I think it perpetuates bad information, but that doesn't help us because this is a thing and we're getting bad information.
Yep.
I grumble.
Yeah.
But we gravitate towards it because it's official sounding. It's incredibly validating. It's so incredibly validating because rejection sensitivity really is a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And also, and I've said this before, our industry does not do a good job of educating people on that which we diagnose them with. I've lost count of how many people I've worked with who I'm like, well, you know about your diagnosis. And they're like, no, I don't. No one's ever told me.
Yeah,
Hi.
Absolutely. Often with my clients, no one's ever explained exactly what the diagnosis means or put it in a context which is relevant to that particular individual's life. Because even if you have a sense about what a diagnosis means, you don't always know what that diagnosis means for you.
Mm-hmm.
In your context.
Yeah.
And really a diagnosis is quite broad because the way we and the diagnosis and our life interacts together is going to be quite specific. So
yeah. I mean, I think I've said it on here before, but like watching Jessica's videos on how to ADHD, like I did have a couple breakdowns here and there because I had been trying so hard to correct things. And rejection sensitivity came into it where I was just like, okay, I need to, be better about this stuff, not take it so personally and everything, and get my emotions under control. And then to learn that no, you have rejection sensitivity because of emotional dysregulation, and that's just how your brain is. Sucked to learn. And being like, I've been trying so hard for this and I've been punching a brick wall and not noticing it.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was one of several things that came up during watching her videos that was just like, oh, well, I thought I could get better at that or, quote unquote, outgrow that. But no, that's just who I am. And like, I'm better about it now, but in the moment, no, not fun.
Right. So if we look at exactly what you shared there around your experience of feeling like A, you weren't alone, and B, this wasn't a problem located within you as much as it was a problem you had to deal with, which is to say, of course, if I have ADHD, it's located in me in the sense that I'm the one having it. But if we look at sort of rejection sensitivity dysphoria, so what that's doing is it's taking that word, which is profound depression, unhappiness, whatever. In other words, I'm super unhappy about my rejection and the sensitivity that I've now got to it. It's because of the rejection I've experienced. Great, but it's still located within me. It basically implies that the unhappiness I'm feeling is something that is my responsibility and is something that I need to change. In other words, I should do some kind of reframe. The reality is, in my experience, there's been a lot of rejection, there's been a lot of correction in school, there's been educators who haven't either A, understood what's going on, or B, assumed I cared, which initially, of course I did, so there wasn't the support. It's not in my head. It's part of my life experience. It isn't just located within me. It's actually systemic.
Mm-hmm.
How people with ADHD and ASD are treated is a systemic problem.
Yup. Well, and this is something I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand, why we may have difficulty regulating our emotions around topics of rejection. There's a reason we came to expect it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That I heard somebody say this to me one time, and I don't know if there's research on this, but this is one of those things that was so validating to my own experiences that I'm like, that makes sense. Somebody hypothesized to me at one point that the reason so many of us on the autism spectrum get so good at pointing out the flaws in other things and being so, quote, negative, is because we have been trained our entire lives to constantly scrutinize our own behavior for perceived imperfections from neurotypical standards.
So we see them everywhere. If in that instance,
so
right?
it doesn't stop with us. We see it in everything else too.
Yep.
Now, again, I don't. That's pure speculation on their part, but it felt very validating to me because that is my experience.
Yeah.
That is an interesting one.
If you're trained to look for something because of your experience and it's helped protect you because you've looked for it in terms of making mistakes, sure, you're going to notice mistakes in others and in other things, in other situations. Yeah.
So we're getting really real on this show.
Yeah. And, I can really, thinking about that, it's interesting because I feel like I certainly leaned on my strengths. I learned to read very young. I was reading by the age of 4. So clearly that all worked. I really struggled with numbers. I still struggle with numeracy now. Anything tedious or that I perceive as difficult, I have to really get myself into a state to do that. Filling out forms, such a joy. Anyway, you get the idea. Where I'm going with this is that I leaned heavily on my strengths, and in those areas that I felt I could control and do well, I got really, really perfectionist, which did not suit me well at all when I got to university, because it's like every single project, every single paper I had to do, I put so much pressure on myself. And of course, getting into university, or kind of, shall we say, a new learning path after having such a mixed experience with school, where some classes doing so well, teachers really, you're great. And of course, others like math and many other, geography and history, I thought were super tedious. So I didn't fall in love with them till later. But my point is, I put so much pressure on myself, and I also didn't trust myself to be a good student. And the combination of that in a new environment made it very, very difficult, because it felt like everything I was doing, the stakes were high. Getting back for a second to that idea of being able to explore and play as a path towards learning, we can see how that wasn't happening. So.
Well, and Mitra, you're getting into something that I know a lot of folks with both with ADHD and who are autistic have expressed to me personally as well, clinically, this idea of perfectionistic anxiety, that it's either perfect or I'm broken. And either I get it all right or I will be rejected.
Yeah.
And there's really no in between. And so again, the sort of operating state becomes one of constant anxiety. And I'm going to call myself out. I'm constantly on edge for that. I've mentioned this on the show, that anytime I'm interacting with another person in any capacity, regardless of who this is, there's this little part of my brain that's like, don't screw this up, don't screw this up, don't screw this up, don't screw this up. And it's oh God, it erodes at your soul.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, I just want to say this, and it's mainly for fun, before we take our little quick break for a disclaimer. I did appreciate later on in school when teachers would reject me in ways that made me just want to go, oh, well, F you, I'm going to do this better. Like, I specifically remember in college, I had an English teacher who read the first writing assignment that I did, and she looked at me and she was like, "You're a writer, aren't you?" And I was like, "Yeah." She goes, "I don't like you." She didn't want writers in her class because she didn't like the way that they treated writing. And I was just like, "Oh, you just made a challenge." Guess who's gonna get an A on every friggin' paper now because of you. Yeah.
Was this an English class?
It was.
What?
Yeah. Yeah, it was fun. But yeah, so we are gonna sorry, I looked at the chat real quick. Yeah, we're gonna take a quick break to remind our viewers and listeners of our disclaimer, but we will be right back with more conversation about rejection sensitivity.
Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.
Already.
Yeah. Hello.
Mm-hmm.
I did want to say real quick because I saw people putting in the chat like, "Oh, the teacher played you," or like, that's not a great teacher." I left the class soon afterwards because it got worse from there.
Oh God.
I don't think that they stuck around as a teacher very long after that either. Wonder why. The next step that we got on our notes is why. And I know that we've talked here and there throughout the episode as to why, but what specifically did you all want to talk about here? Why?
I mean, we've already talked about how we so many of us are essentially taught that this is going to be a consistent pattern of behavior, especially if we deviate from perceived social norms for whatever reason, whether it's we come from a different culture, we're autistic, we've got ADHD, we're corrected all the time. And we learn that we're going to be corrected all the time.
Yeah, and that in some way we don't belong. In some way we're not the norm. And this also prevents that sense of safety.
Wait, are you saying that's why when I send something over for approval, I go, "Let me know what's wrong with it"?
Yeah, you're really preempting criticism. You're sort of setting expectation for yourself as well.
Oh,
right?
wow. Just learned something about myself again. Oop, there we go.
And there's all sorts of cognitive appraisals we can learn in the process of this. And that's the thing. There's no one why for any of this stuff. And there's no one way it affects anybody, despite the fact that we'll perseverate on and in many cases overreact to a little itty bitty thing. But there's no one cause. There's all sorts of causes, and so many of them make sense.
Yeah, I think once we start to dismantle those barriers and reasons, it can become better. And I actually will mention, so just for a second there, when we were on our break, I was talking about a university prof I'd gone to see. And this was someone in a third-year course. I'd been taking this course. I loved his course. I was having a lot of trouble getting the essays done, partly because, again, there was some pressure because I really valued his opinion and I thought he was fabulous. And so I was in his office, probably asking for an extension. And he looked at me and he said, "You know what? I see how well you do in class. You say some brilliant things. What is it that's getting in the way for you?" And I just thought that question, like initially I was like, Nobody's ever asked me that. Nobody has ever assumed I wanted to do well and that there was a barrier. They just assumed I wasn't doing well, or that somehow I should be better, or that I should pay better attention, or, you have potential. But nobody said, hey, if you've got potential, what's preventing you from achieving it? So that's a question I often ask parents to ask their kids, no matter what's going on. Like, okay, if you're having trouble sitting still, what's getting in the way? If there's a problem with bringing your dishes in from the kitchen, what's going on? Like, just assume that they want to do well, whatever it is, and then look at what's interfering with that. Anyway, yeah, really changed how I saw the world and myself. And, anyway.
Well, and this also kind of gets into some of the common strategies that are used to approach concepts of rejection sensitivity. One of them is essentially having these corrective experiences by people who appreciate the complexity of us while asking about a component, and essentially separating out a behavior from us as a person. Like, hey, I noticed that this is getting in the way for something, but you have so many strengths in all of these areas. How can we merge the two?
Yeah, because we don't want those strengths to feel like pressure. We want those strengths to feel like resources.
Exactly. And that's a big difference between, because I don't want to speak for too many people, but I think a lot of us, I'm going to anyway, I think a lot of us who experience this extreme sensitivity, even perseveration for days or weeks about slights, social rejections, we have a hard time separating out situation from the person, us. It's not that we were rejected in a situation, it's we as a person were rejected. And that's really common.
Yeah, and particularly when things happen during your formative years, as a child, you don't really have a strong sense of you as a person. So there's just, you as, in a situation. You just have a teacher who doesn't like you. You have a teacher who just doesn't think you're good enough. And in our life, we often still return to that sense. Not because of the teacher, but because as humans, until we start to parse things out, we do take things personally. So we might constantly feel like we're not good enough for our spouse, or we're not good enough for our boss. And until we start to break down what's going on, for us and in that situation, it's hard to separate those things. It's a natural human tendency.
Well, there's a lot of trust that comes along with it. We've now talked about Jessica McCabe had ADHD a couple of times, but I'm just going to straight up say this. So Jessica and I work together very closely, and she is the best creative collaborator I have ever had, because there's a lot of trust there that if I'm writing something and she says that doesn't work, I have enough trust in her to know she thinks well of me as a person, and she's not rejecting me. She's saying, I know you can do better. Let's make it better. That thing just didn't work. And that differentiation and having enough safety there and enough trust, that makes a huge difference.
Massive.
Yeah, because it's
Absolutely.
not her rejecting me. It's her rejecting an idea because she believes in me, and vice versa.
Right. Exactly. That's the level of trust at which we can do really good creative work. And all good work is creative work, in a sense. Absolutely. Okay, maybe not cleaning the bathroom. Like, what can I tell you? But,
I will tell you from personal experience, you can get creative with cleaning the bathroom.
Okay. And on that note, I do want to, we got a couple of questions. Remember, you can drop a question in the chat, and our awesome mod Mars will grab them, put it into a text doc so that I can read them off later. But before we get to that, I did want to give some time to common strategies.
Yeah, good idea. Thanks for keeping us on track. Yeah. Common strategies. Okay.
Yep. Well, we mentioned having corrective experiences essentially, because for a lot of us who experience this rejection sensitivity, it's because we've really built up enough memories and we've built up enough memories and experiences of rejection that's what we can draw from. That's what comes to mind immediately. And so essentially, if we are able to put ourselves in situations where we see acceptance over and over and over and over and over again, for me anyway, that helped a lot, you know.
Absolutely. And it comes back to either those teachers who have faith in us, or as an adult, finding those people who we do trust and feel comfortable with, or doing small projects to check it out with other people, or trying a creative process and seeing how it feels. If we can be received and there's enthusiasm and warmth there, that helps us also accept ourselves, because that's the path to self-acceptance, is to lay off the judgment and move into a sense of play with what we're doing and just try things. And also to start to recognize what are the things that we find difficult, and how can we get supports in order to cope with them, because of course some difficult things like taxes just have to be done, and finding supports, or working together with someone, or just working in the same room with someone. We've talked about this, the body doubling, that you've mentioned, that Jessica's done a video about that, I think.
Is she?
She's done something where she talks about, sorry,
there's so many.
I seem to remember. Well, I seem to remember that one. And the idea is that if you're doing a tedious task, it's not that someone has to share the task with you. It's just that if they're in the same space working on their thing, then it can be a lot easier for you to just focus on yours, right? And you certainly, I remember when you were studying for your exams, you'd do a stream where you studied and other people could join in and watch, right? And study along. There's something that's coming to me.
Oh God.
And
I don't want to think about those.
Okay, you don't want to think about those.
Oh,
Great,
God.
because you're through them. But I certainly remember studying with other people, or just writing papers in the same room with someone else. And also think about when you take breaks, when you're doing something that's tedious or lengthy. So it's partly, and the way I would do that is, don't take a break right in the middle of something. Take a break when you get to a natural endpoint with something.
Yes.
The end of a paragraph, or the end of a chapter if you're writing something, or the end of a month if you're doing your accounts or something. And the reason I say this is it's way easier next time you come into it if you are forgetful, or like me, have ADHD. These strategies sometimes can help us take care of ourselves. And that's why I'm sharing them. So it's not just rejection from other people, but sometimes it's a why am I like this, and a self-rejection narrative that also takes over. So we want to undercut that as much as possible, because one way through this is being able to better accept ourselves and go, okay, this is where I'm at. What steps can I take to make things better? And who can I call on for help and support through this?
So to kind of add to that, I have two thoughts. One, if you as always, if you feel like this applies to you, that this is something you struggle with and it affects your life greatly, talk to a mental health professional if you can, because there can be a lot of different reasons for it. We can't diagnose, we can't tell you what's going to work for you. They're going to help get to the underlying what's going on here.
I actually want to jump in real quick.
There's a lot of different reasons it can happen.
Because I try to save the questions for later, but there is a question that is very relevant to this and comes from Garwar. Question: if today's topic resonates with us, what should we be saying to our therapists to make sure it is addressed?
I mean, if it's me, I'm just gonna straight up say that I struggle with rejection. I struggle with perceived rejection, whether it's real or whether it's imagined. It's something that I struggle with, and it greatly affects my life. And I want to change something about that and figure out what's going on here. I mean, that's how I'd bring it up.
Yeah, I mean, I would talk a little bit, and I'm sure your therapist will ask about your history with this. your experience growing up a little bit, what
Mhm.
kinds of thought process did you internalize
Mhm.
around your own capacity to do whatever it is that you're experiencing this sense of rejection around? Where did it start? And then they'll help tease that apart and help you figure out what tools to put in place that will make coping on the day-to-day easier. They'll help you figure out who your allies are, and they'll help you counter some of that negative self-talk that comes up. Because I think when we, especially if we struggle and it's like tasks or it's like I'm not good at, those kinds of messages, you want to have some kind of response for that side of you
Mm-hmm.
where you can say, okay, yeah, it's true I struggle with X, but I've always been good at Y. Or, yeah, okay, but do those things define me,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because they're part of me, they're not all of me. So you
Right.
want to be able to have some responses for yourself, because otherwise we can kind of get into a negative spiral.
Yeah.
And so, your therapist will help you figure out what your tools might be, or what
Yeah.
your self-talk might be, or who your supports are, who you might call or go for coffee with, or,
Mm-hmm.
any of those things at that time, who you could reach out to.
Yep.
Mhm.
Just gonna pass over to other questions. But you got anything else you want to put there?
Well, and this is something that my second point that I was going to make is something that I think speaks to a couple of the questions here, at least in my own experiences. One of the most corrective experiences I ever had actually had to do with a former theatrical choreographer I used to work with, because I used to do community musicals and that sort of stuff. Probably shocking no one. And one of the things she said that just stuck with me when we were getting discouraged about her being really nitpicky about our choreography was, no, gang. I know this feels discouraging because I'm getting really nitpicky, but let me tell you, this is a good thing, because if I have the luxury of getting nitpicky right now, it means you're doing all the big things right. We're
Yeah.
tweaking, not overhauling.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
means you're doing great.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself
Perspective.
was such a monumental experience for me.
Perspective and reframing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I mean, that really does fall into what we've talked about with ADHD and ASD of like not being able to pick up on those subtext things that apparently everybody else gets. I don't understand. What are you talking about?
What's a subtext?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I want to pass over to chat real quick because we are getting low on time. We got a show coming up directly after us. First one that I want to address really quickly, lurking writer put question is rejection sensitivity is something that can be identified at an early age, say before 10 or so, or is it identifiable if symptoms still persist at a certain age? I will tell you this. Here's a fun story from when I was 8. I found out that my stepbrother threw away my Christmas cards, and I started crying because I thought that meant he didn't love me. So yes, it can.
I think it's important to point out that rejection sensitivity is not a diagnosis.
Yeah.
Rejection sensitivity is something, a component that can exist with a variety of challenges and diagnoses for a variety of reasons. And it, like Mitra very, very rightly brought up, it can also exist purely because of social factors.
Yes.
Absolutely. And it can certainly also exist because, say you're really struggling with chronic health, which means you can't commit to go and do things. And then people stop asking you to do stuff. And then you start to feel really rejected.
Yep.
And that makes sense,
Yep.
right? So think about all of these different contexts. So yes, if you have a child who's clearly struggling with school, you bet they sometimes feel or experience some rejection. And that it's really worth then discussing it with teachers or with the kid and see what's going on, because there are a variety of reasons we might experience rejection. We're just trying to dislocate this idea of being sensitive to rejection from purely being something that's somehow specially associated with ASD and ADHD, because that's just not true.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really important not to sort of locate this sense of rejection within the person who's already struggling in their life context. And it feels really unfair to place a label on them that somehow, because they already have a number of things going on or diagnoses, whatever, that now it's somehow their fault that they're feeling greater rejection, or that they're thinking about it, in this way, or that they're super sensitive to it. Like, come on, that's their life experience. Who
And
wouldn't be?
it feels disempowering in a lot of
Very,
respects, and it puts a lot more onus on us when we're already told, hey, you're already screwing up.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh, and it also makes it more difficult to ask for additional supports.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're already feeling like you're taking up space, or that you should get your act together, how on earth is it then easy to say, hey, this is kind of what I'm dealing with, and I need a little extra time to do the assignment or whatever. And then you're accused of narcissism and maybe being special. Not speaking of myself or anything here.
Let's see here. Let's do CY Morgan. CY Morgan says, how can I and my neurotypical husband work together to reach that kind of trust? And I think that was talking about with Dr. B and Jessica.
Well, I mean, as always, I'm going to suggest that you can find somebody who can speak to your direct circumstances, because that's not something that we can really give you direct advice on. I can just tell you from my own personal experience that what worked for me, and of course that may not work for other people, because this is just me. What helped me is just having trust and enough praise that somebody that I could trust, that if they're criticizing an action I'm taking, they're not criticizing me.
Yeah.
See, and that's something you can check out with your partner, I would say. But again, not knowing your circumstances, it's kind of tough to say. If it comes to it, there are mental health professionals who work with couples, and who can do a great job teasing the different factors that might be coming into play in your life, and give you support through that.
Yep. Let's see. Let's do this question from Crafty Rebel.
What's up, Crafty?
This was on Twitter, so might not have been entirely true. But I've heard of people being diagnosed and not being even told of the diagnosis, which is messed up as heck. How could anyone help themselves in that case?
I'm not sure of the circumstances in which people aren't told about their diagnosis, but I kind of feel like that's not super ethical if you're not being told about. So you're saying, it sounds like if there's a diagnosis that you're not told about.
Say that, like, you just learned that you were like, let's say that I was diagnosed with ADD when I was a kid, and nobody told me, and then I found out later on. What steps would you say would be, like, I best one that I can think of is, like, just start to do as much research as you can about it. Like, if it was the situation with ADHD, Jessica's videos on how to ADHD is a great resource of learning about what it is. But yeah, don't do that. That's bad. That's messed up.
Yeah, I think that's really not super helpful. I think in terms of coming to terms with or making sense of a diagnosis, again, mental health professionals can help with this. Research can help. Learning as much as you can, Jessica's videos, that kind of thing, just to make sense of how a diagnosis is landing for you, or whether it even was the appropriate diagnosis that makes sense to you in your situation. It's really worth looking at that as well.
Yeah.
So.
Fortunately, I'm gonna have to cut it off there because of time. But who knows? Maybe we'll do another one of those revisiting questions episodes. So we might get your question.
Do love those.
That was a really fun one. So we might get to those questions at a later date. But yeah, that is good. That's gonna be it for our conversation. But where can people find you on the interwebs if they would like to do so?
So people can find me at mitrajordan.com. And certainly they are always welcome to respond to me on Twitter. And I am available in both those places, and Dr. B is available everywhere.
I mean, I'm around.
You're around.
Available is a different question.
Okay, available is a very different question. I'm going to say around as well. Accessible, reachable. How's that?
Yeah, I mean, y'all can find me on most social media platforms at the Dr. B, TheeDoctor, B as in boy. But you know what's more important than following me on the Twitters, as much as I appreciate that? Follow Take This on all the socials at Take This, or go check out the kind of resources and mental health education that we have. We've got a variety of wonderful people working for us that do some just amazing, amazing work.
Yeah. Did Mitra go? Did I miss that?
Yeah,
No,
no,
I'm
Mitra
not
goes
here.
first.
Oh,
Mitra
I'm
always
sorry.
goes first.
I thought I'm sorry. I had a bunch of things popping up at once. I apologize. Hey, me getting distracted. Who'd have thunk?
Not me. I wasn't distracted at all. What?
You can
I'm
find
sorry,
me.
what?
You can find me on Twitter at the Treavor. There is an A hiding in there, and the way too many podcasts that I do.
So many.
Yeah, and you can also find me anywhere the Idle Champions community is, because I'm the community manager and I'm around there. Yeah, that is going to do it for this week's episode. Coming up directly after this is the triumphant return of Bardic Inspiration. We return today. They return today. It's a day of returns. Be sure to check that out and stick around. Yeah, that is going to do it for this week's episode. So until next week, episode 2 of season 5, take care of yourself.
Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.